Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above Dawson Daniels as he leaned against the weathered fence post, surveying his cattle grazing in the distance. At 42, the lines on his face told stories of harsh winters and solitary years. His ranch, nestled in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains, had been his only companion since his parents passed a decade ago. The locals called him the Lone Wolf of Clearwater County, a title he neither embraced nor rejected. 20 miles away, in the small town of Pinewood, Eleanor Vance stared at her reflection in the antique mirror of her in-law's bathroom. She barely recognized herself. Her once shoulder-length chestnut hair now lay in uneven chunks around her feet. Her mother-in-law, Martha, had held her down while her sister-in-law, Patrice, hacked away with kitchen scissors. Too vain, they'd said. Not proper for a widow still in mourning. But the haircut wasn't the worst part. They'd smeared a mixture of ash and berries across her face, a traditional mourning practice from their family's obscure religious sect. The dark paste felt tight against her skin as it dried. You'll wear it for 40 days, Martha had instructed. It's what James would have wanted. James, her husband of 3 years who died 6 months ago in a logging accident. The same man who'd promised to take her away from her troubled past in Chicago, only to bring her to this isolated town where his family's word was law. Dinner in 20 minutes, Martha called through the door. And don't you dare wash your face, young lady. Ellie's hands trembled as she touched the jagged ends of her hair. At 34, she was a widow with no money, no family beyond these people, and no way out. James had always handled the finances, insisting it was a husband's duty. Now she knew why. Control was the family business. She slipped her wedding ring off, the gold band feeling suddenly foreign in her palm. The woman James had married wouldn't have allowed this humiliation. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost herself. Enough, she whispered, tucking the ring into her pocket. Tonight, after everyone was asleep, she would leave. She had $63 hidden in her copy of Jane Eyre and a vague plan to head west. Anywhere had to be better than here. Dawn had barely broken when Dawson guided his truck into town for his monthly supply run. Pinewood's main street was quiet, with only the diner showing signs of life. He needed coffee before facing Franklin's general store and the inevitable small talk that would follow. The bell above the diner door jangled as he entered. Ruby, the 60-something waitress who'd been serving coffee since before Dawson was born, nodded toward his usual booth. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, hash browns, wheat toast, she recited without asking. Morning to you too, Ruby, Dawson said, settling into the worn vinyl seat. That's when he saw her, a woman hunched in the corner booth, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the early hour and the dim lighting. A baseball cap was pulled low over what looked like very short, uneven hair. Something about her rigid posture caught his attention. She was trying too hard to be invisible. Ruby followed his gaze. Poor thing came in last night, looking like she'd been through hell. Paid for coffee, but just sat there all night. Won't talk to nobody. Dawson nodded, focusing on his breakfast when it arrived. He wasn't one to pry into strangers' business. Lord knew he valued his own privacy. When he finished eating, he left his usual generous tip and headed for the door. The woman hadn't moved, her coffee long cold. As he passed her table, she flinched, and he caught a glimpse of dark smudges on her neck that the sunglasses couldn't hide. Outside, he loaded his supplies into his truck, trying to shake the image of that woman from his mind. Not his business. He had 50 head of cattle to worry about, fence lines to check, and a leaky roof to patch before the next rainstorm. But as he climbed into his truck, he saw 3 people marching purposefully toward the diner. An older woman flanked by a man and younger woman, all wearing the same grim expression. Through the diner window, he saw the woman in sunglasses suddenly go rigid. Dawson hesitated, hand on the ignition. Not his business. Not his problem. The trio entered the diner. Even from outside, he could hear the older woman's voice rising. Eleanor Vance, you disgrace. How dare you remove the mourning marks? Something in Dawson snapped. Before he could think better of it, he was back inside the diner, standing between the 3 angry people and the woman, Eleanor, who looked as though she might shatter at any moment. Everything all right here? He asked, his voice low but carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. This is family business, the man said, puffing up his chest. Step aside. Doesn't look like the lady wants to speak with you, Dawson replied evenly. She's my daughter-in-law, the older woman spat. She's disrespecting my son's memory with this escape attempt. Eleanor stood, her voice surprisingly steady despite her trembling hands. I'm not going back, Martha. James is gone. You can't keep me prisoner anymore. You ungrateful. The younger woman lunged forward, but Dawson shifted, blocking her path. Ma'am, he addressed Eleanor directly. Do you need assistance? For a long moment, Eleanor was silent. Then she removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes rimmed red from crying and faint dark streaks on her face where she'd tried to scrub away whatever had been applied. Yes, she whispered. I do. Dawson nodded once. Then you're coming with me. The older woman, Martha, gasped. You can't just take her. Who do you think you are? Dawson Daniels, he replied simply. I ranch outside of town, and I'm giving the lady a ride wherever she wants to go. We'll call the sheriff, the man threatened. Ruby, who had been watching the scene unfold, snorted. Sheriff Peterson? Who plays poker with Dawson every other Thursday? Good luck with that, Harold. Eleanor gathered her small backpack, moving to stand beside Dawson. This isn't over, Martha hissed at Eleanor. You belong to our family now. No, Eleanor replied, straightening her shoulders. I don't belong to anyone. The first 10 miles passed in silence. Eleanor stared out the window, watching the town recede and the landscape open up into rolling fields and distant mountains. I don't know where I'm going, she finally admitted. I just knew I had to leave. Dawson kept his eyes on the road. Got family somewhere? No, no one. Another mile passed before he spoke again. I've got a caretaker's cabin on my property. Previous owner built it for his mother. It's small, but it's clean. You can stay there until you figure things out. Eleanor turned to study him, taking in his weathered profile. Why would you help a stranger? Because someone should have, he said simply. At the ranch, Dawson showed her to the cabin, a one-room structure with a small kitchenette, bathroom, and a bed tucked into the corner. It was sparse but spotlessly clean, with a view of the mountains through the single window. It's not much, he said, suddenly self-conscious. It's perfect, Eleanor replied, running her hand over the simple wooden table. How much for rent? We can figure that out later. For now, get settled. There's a landline if you need to make calls. Cell service is spotty at best out here. Before leaving, he hesitated at the door. Those marks on your face. Eleanor's hand reflexively went to her cheek. Traditional mourning practice, according to my in-laws. They cut my hair and blackened my face with ash when I wouldn't wear the full mourning clothes anymore. Said I needed to show proper respect. Dawson's jaw tightened. That's not tradition. That's control. He nodded toward the bathroom. There's soap and clean towels. Dinner's at 6 in the main house if you want company. Or I can bring something over. I'll come to you, she said. And Mr. Daniels? Thank you. Dawson, he corrected. Just Dawson. Over the next week, Eleanor began to find her footing. She insisted on earning her keep, so Dawson taught her basic ranch tasks, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, and helping in the vegetable garden that had gone somewhat wild since his mother's passing. She'd expected the work to be a means to an end, but found herself enjoying the rhythm of ranch life. Each morning, she woke to the sound of birds rather than Martha's disapproving voice. Each night, she sat on her small porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Dawson was a man of few words, but she found his silence comforting rather than oppressive. He didn't press her for details about her marriage or what led to her fleeing her in-laws. Instead, he taught her practical things, how to mend a fence, the names of the wildflowers that grew in the meadows, which clouds meant rain was coming. You're good with the horses, he commented one afternoon as she brushed down Mercy, his gentlest mare. Ever ridden before? In another life, she replied. I grew up in Chicago, but my uncle had a small farm outside the city. I spent summers there until I was 16. What happened when you were 16? Eleanor's brush strokes faltered. My parents died. Car accident. My uncle couldn't take me in permanently, so I bounced around foster homes until I aged out. Dawson nodded, absorbing this information without comment. Mercy's saddled if you want to ride the east pasture with me. Need to check the fence line. The invitation was casual, but Eleanor recognized it for what it was, trust. Dawson Daniels didn't let just anyone near his beloved horses or ride his land. As they rode side by side, The tension Eleanor had carried for years began to loosen. The woman who had been James Vance's wife, quiet, deferential, increasingly isolated, was fading away. In her place, someone new was emerging. Someone who laughed at the antics of a prairie dog, who raced her horse across an open field just for the joy of it, who had opinions and voiced them without fear. One evening, as they sat on Dawson's porch watching the fireflies emerge, Eleanor finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Why do you live alone out here? No wife, no family. Dawson took a slow sip of his coffee. Had a fiancée once. Caroline. She was from Seattle, came out here to study wildlife conservation. We were together 2 years. He paused. She tried to love this life, but it wasn't in her blood. Went back to the city. Can't blame her. You didn't consider going with her? This land has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not just property to me. He gestured toward the mountains. My grandfather's buried on that ridge. My parents too. This is where I belong. Eleanor nodded, understanding. James promised me adventure when we met. I was 29, working 2 jobs, living in a tiny apartment. He talked about wide open spaces, building a life together. She sighed. But his idea of together meant fitting me into a box his family had constructed generations ago. Some men don't know how to love without possession, Dawson observed quietly. And some women forget how to exist without permission, she added. Their eyes met in the fading light, an understanding passing between them that required no words. 3 weeks after her arrival, Sheriff Peterson's cruiser rolled up the dusty driveway. Eleanor was in the garden harvesting tomatoes when she heard the car. Her blood ran cold. Dawson emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached the sheriff. Pete, he nodded. Something I can help you with. Afraid so, Dawson. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Got the Vance family in my office every day. They filed a report claiming you're harboring their daughter-in-law against her will. Even talking about kidnapping charges. That's ridiculous, Eleanor said, setting down her basket and walking over. I'm here by choice. Sheriff Peterson had the grace to look embarrassed. I figured as much, Ms. Vance. But they're making a stink, and I need to show I followed up. He cleared his throat. They're also claiming you took family property when you left. Jewelry, specifically. Said it belonged to James's grandmother. Eleanor's hand went to her pocket where she still carried her wedding ring. The only jewelry I have is my wedding ring, which James gave me. Can I see it? The sheriff asked. She handed over the simple gold band. The sheriff examined it, then returned it with a nod. Doesn't match the description of what they're claiming is missing. Sounds like they're just trying to cause trouble. Is there anything else? Dawson asked, his stance protective without being obvious about it. Well, there is the matter of your situation here, the sheriff said delicately. Small towns talk, you understand. Unmarried man and woman living on the same property. I'm in the caretaker's cabin, Eleanor said firmly. And I'm a widow, not some fragile reputation that needs protecting. The sheriff raised his hands in surrender, just passing along concerns. Personally, I think you're both adults and it's nobody's business. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing. The Vances mentioned they'd be bringing their preacher out this way to counsel Ms. Vance. I told them they'd need permission to come onto private property, but thought you should know they're planning something. After the sheriff left, Eleanor's hands wouldn't stop trembling. They won't stop, she whispered. They'll keep coming. Dawson's face was grim. You're not property to be claimed, Ellie. It was the first time he'd used the nickname, and something warm unfurled in her chest despite her fear. Maybe I should move on, she said, not meeting his eyes. I've imposed on you enough. Is that what you want? He asked quietly. No, she admitted. But I don't want to bring you trouble either. Dawson was silent for a long moment. My neighbor, Frank Miller, is looking to sell his place. 500 acres bordering my east property line. He's getting too old to manage it alone. Eleanor looked at him, confused by the apparent change of subject. I've been thinking about buying it, Dawson continued. Expanding my operation. Could use a partner, though. A partner. Someone with a good head on their shoulders. Someone who's not afraid of hard work. Someone who's starting to love this land as much as I do. His eyes held her steadily. That person would have legal claim to the property. No one could force them to go anywhere. Eleanor's breath caught. Dawson, are you offering me a business partnership? To start with, he said, the faintest hint of color touching his weathered cheeks. I'm not a man who rushes things, Ellie. but I know what I want when I see it. And I've never been more certain of anything than I am of you. Her heart hammered against her ribs. You hardly know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you wake up before dawn because you love watching the sunrise. I know you sing to the chickens when you think no one's listening. I know you're stronger than anyone's given you credit for. He took a step closer. And I know that for the first time in my life, this ranch doesn't feel lonely anymore. Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes. Not tears of sadness or fear, but of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. I can't offer much in terms of capital, she said. You'd be contributing something more valuable than money, he replied. A future. The next day, they drove into town together to meet with Frank Miller and his lawyer. Eleanor used the last of her hidden cash as a down payment on her half of the property, with a contract to pay the rest through profit sharing from the expanded ranch operations. As they left the lawyer's office, legal papers in hand making her official co-owner of the Miller property, they nearly collided with Martha and Harold Vance on the sidewalk. Well, if it isn't the runaway widow, Martha sneered. Playing rancher now? This disgraceful behavior needs to stop, Eleanor. Your place is with your husband's family. Eleanor squared her shoulders. My husband is dead, Martha. And as of today, I'm a property owner in Clearwater County. She held up the papers. I'm building a new life. One that doesn't include you. Harold stepped forward menacingly. You think some papers change anything? You're still James's wife in the eyes of God. No, Eleanor said firmly. I'm not anyone's wife. I'm my own person. Martha's face contorted with rage. Our preacher will be visiting you, Eleanor. Your soul needs saving whether you recognize it or not. Any uninvited visitors to our property will be treated as trespassers, Dawson stated calmly. I believe Sheriff Peterson already made that clear. Martha's eyes narrowed as she looked between them. So the rumors are true. Barely 6 months a widow and already sharing a bed with the first man who showed interest. Eleanor felt a flash of the old shame, the conditioning to accept blame and judgment. But then she felt Dawson's steady presence beside her, not defending her honor with grand gestures, but simply standing with her, supporting her right to make her own choices. What Ellie and I are to each other is none of your concern, he said. But I'll tell you this much. She's earned her place on that ranch with hard work and courage. More than I can say for folks who use religion to control and humiliate others. Martha gasped. How dare you? We were only following the traditional ways. No, Eleanor said, finding her voice again. You were punishing me for not conforming, for not becoming the perfect, obedient daughter-in-law who would let you dictate every aspect of her life. That's not tradition, that's abuse. Harold moved as if to grab her arm, but Dawson stepped between them. This conversation is over, he said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable warning. Ellie, shall we go home? Home. The word resonated through Eleanor's entire being. Yes, she said. Let's go home. As summer faded into autumn, Eleanor and Dawson fell into a comfortable rhythm. They renovated the old Miller house, turning it into a guest ranch where city folks could come experience farm life. Eleanor's natural warmth and Dawson's knowledge of the land made them perfect hosts, and bookings began to fill for the following spring. Their relationship evolved slowly, neither of them rushing what was building between them. Some evenings they sat in comfortable silence on the porch. Other nights they talked until the stars were bright overhead. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, his memories of his parents, his fears of failing the legacy they'd left him. She shared stories of her brief, happy childhood, the struggles of her foster years, the early days with James when she still believed in love. They had their disagreements. Dawson was stubborn and set in his ways, while Eleanor was still finding her voice and sometimes pushed too hard against any perceived control. But they learned to navigate these waters together, each giving the other space when needed. The Vances made one more attempt to reclaim Eleanor, showing up with their preacher one Sunday morning. They found the ranch gates locked, with a new sign reading Daniels and Vance Ranch, private property. The message was clear. Eleanor had claimed not only her independence, but her rightful place in the world. They drove away and never returned. As the first snow dusted the mountains, Dawson found Eleanor standing on the ridge where his family was buried. She brought wildflowers, dried and preserved from summer, and placed them carefully on each grave. Your parents would have liked it here, she said when she sensed him approaching. The guest ranch, I mean. Bringing new life to the property. They would have loved you, he replied, the words simple but weighted with meaning. Eleanor turned to face him, her hair now grown out into a stylish bob that framed her face. The woman who had stumbled into that diner months ago, broken and afraid, was gone. In her place stood someone strong, confident, and increasingly content. I've been thinking, she said, about that ring I've been carrying around. Dawson waited, giving her the space to continue. I'm ready to let it go, she said. Not because I'm forgetting James, but because I'm honoring who I've become since him. She pulled the gold band from her pocket. I thought I might bury it here, with your family. A symbol of laying the past to rest. Dawson nodded, understanding the significance of the gesture. He helped her dig a small hole beneath an aspen tree, its leaves golden in the autumn light. As she dropped the ring into the earth, Eleanor felt the last threads of her old life releasing their hold. Goodbye, James, she whispered. I hope you found peace. They covered the small hole together, their hands touching in the cool soil. Ellie, Dawson said, his voice unusually hesitant. I'm not a man who finds words easily. She smiled. I've noticed. But there are things that need saying. He took her hands in his. I never expected you. Never thought I'd find someone who understands this life, who sees this land the way I do. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I don't want to be your safety net. I want to be your choice. Eleanor felt tears prickling behind her eyes. You are, she whispered. Every day, I choose you. Not because I need rescuing, but because together, we're building something real. The kiss that followed was gentle but certain. A promise without words, a beginning without fear. As they walked hand in hand back toward the ranch houses, one old, one new, both home, Eleanor thought about the strange path that had led her here. The pain, the loss, the moments of desperation that had seemed like endings but were actually doorways. You're coming with me, Dawson had said that day in the diner, not as a command but as an offer of sanctuary. Now, months later, they were walking together toward a future neither of them had imagined possible. Two loners who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, respect, and the courage to begin again. The first snow continued to fall softly around them, covering the land in a clean, white blanket. Nature's way of saying that even the most scarred earth can be made new again, given time and the right conditions to heal. Rating?